Welcome to the Writer's Toolbox. In this episode, we're going to be looking at analysis. Quite often, teachers would tell their students to analyse, and this results in confusion, with students not understanding what to do. So let's take a moment to see what it means to analyse. Essentially, when we analyse, we break things down in order to bring out the essential elements or structure. This involves identifying parts and relationships, and interpreting information to reach conclusions. So what we're doing is we're looking at all the small parts of an event or a thing, how they relate to each other, and what we can understand from this. For example, in biology, we might ask, what are the parts of a cell? How do those parts of a cell work together? And what impact does the cell have upon the body as a whole? In history, we might ask, what are the events of a time in history? How do these events relate to one another? Why did they happen? And what significant changes happened as a result of these events? And in literature, what we do is we look at the parts of a text, what they reveal about the text as a whole, and we see what this shows us about things beyond the text in the real world. Let's look at this three-step structure in a bit more detail. There are three levels to this analysis. In the first one, we identify things and their effects. Here we can look for literary devices or uses of language or story elements. This might be a simile or a setting, for example. And then we look at what the effects this have upon the reader. How does it make them think or feel? We can express this by saying, this is saying, this means, or through the use of X, the reader, blah, blah, blah. Here, we're taking a magnifying glass and looking at the fine details of a text. In the second level, we ask, how does this apply to the text as a whole? What does this show us in level 1 about everything else in the story? We can think about the character, the setting, the plot, the theme, or the tone, for example. Here, we're not looking at the finer details, we're looking at the text as a whole. We can use language like, this reveals, this highlights, this signifies, this indicates, and this reflects. Finally, in level 3, we're making connections. We're looking at what we found in level 1 and 2 and seeing what they tell us about a theme, about the world, about history, about other literature or the people who make it, such as the author. Here we can use language like suggests, blah 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 demonstrates, blah 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 indicates, this alludes to, or this is important because. Here we're not looking at the finer details of the text as a whole, we're looking beyond the text, at a bigger picture. Let's look at an example from The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Just to give you some background information, The Great Gatsby was written in the 1920s, and this was an important time in America. People were dealing with the traumas of World War I. The economy was booming, technology was advancing, and women were experiencing more freedoms. However, culturally, America was becoming more decadent and more materialistic. In this section of the book, which was written in the 1920s and reflects this situation, Nick, the narrator, goes to one of his neighbour's parties for the first time. Chapter 3 begins like this. There was music from a neighbour's house through the summer nights. In his blue gardens, men and girls came and went like moths among the whisperings and the champagne and the stars. There's a lot we can look at here. There's many different specific uses of language, figurative language and story elements that we might want to analyse. For this example, let's look at this simile here. Like moths, this is an interesting way to describe people. Maybe we could say that this simile depicts the partygoers as being enchanted by luxury. Moths are often drawn towards shiny things, lights or flames, and this often results in them being killed. So by using this simile, what effect does the writer have? Well, he's saying that the partygoers are like moths. They're unable to help themselves from engaging in destructive behaviour. So that's level 1. What have we identified? A simile. And what effect does this have? It translates the meaning that the partygoers are being destructive. Level 2. What does this show us about the whole story of The Great Gatsby? And this highlights the destructive tendencies of the characters and their materialistic personalities. Throughout the story, characters are attracted to wealth and status, even though their attraction has negative consequences for them. As you can see here, we're taking this small little detail of this in this one sentence and applying it to the story as a whole. Now, level 3. These characters represent strong cultural shift in America during the 1920s. Due to the effects of World War I and the economic boom that followed, a lot of people were disenchanted by traditional American values and had a lot of money to explore new lifestyles. As a result, excessive partying was prevalent throughout the decade. Here, in this level, we're looking beyond this sentence, beyond the text, and into history and society at the time in which it was written. Let's put all this together. F. Scott Fitzgerald depicts the upper classes of the 1920s as being destructively decadent through the use of imagery. Before Nick attends one of Gatsby's parties, he notices that Gatsby's upper-class guests attend them like moths. This simile depicts the partygoers as being enchanted by luxury. Moths are often drawn towards bright lights without being able to stop themselves, which often results in them burning to death. By using this simile, Fitzgerald is saying that the partygoers are like moths, unable to help themselves from engaging in destructive behaviour. This highlights the destructive tendencies of the characters and their materialistic personalities, who are attracted to wealth and status even though the attraction has negative consequences for them. These characters represent a strong cultural shift that occurred in America during the 1920s. Due to the effects of World War I and economic boom that followed, a lot of people were disenchanted by traditional American values and had a lot of money to explore new lifestyles. As a result, excessive partygoing was prevalent throughout the decade. As it can be seen, F. Scott Fitzgerald's use of imagery captures the destructive materialism of the 1920s in America. As you can see here, this is a very well structured and developed paragraph. There's a lot of analysis happening. But if you look at the writer's words, there's only 2 words that we're looking at, like moths. This brings us to the most important part of analysis. In literature or other subjects, when we analyse things, we want to break things down, and then we want to say a lot about a little. Say a lot about a little. Take a small piece of a text and say a lot about it. Try and relate it to things outside of the sentence in which it's been written, outside of a chapter, outside of a text, and into society, history, the life of the author, ideas and concepts that you can bring to a text yourself. Let's go back to this example. Here's another thing we can look at. And. This technique is called polysyndeton, when we use and instead of commas. What this does is it creates a sense of excess and abundance. This is what we've identified and its effect. Let's apply it to the text. It highlights the wealth of the characters. Let's apply it beyond the text. It demonstrates a newfound wealth experienced by a lot of people in the 1920s. Another example, men and girls. This is an interesting lexical choice. We use men, which is the adult word for males, and girls, which is the adolescent or child word for females. This portrays women as being less than men. We've identified something, and we've considered its effect. Let's apply it to the text as a whole. This reflects the control that men have over women throughout the entire story. Now let's look beyond the text to something else. This suggests that even though women experienced new freedoms in the 1920s, they were still treated as less than men. If you remember anything from this video, I want you to remember these 3 things. When we analyse, we break things down in order to bring out their essential meanings. We look at parts and relationships. We apply them to the things within the text itself and then the things outside of the text. We have a 3-step structure that we can follow in order to help us analyse. We identify things and their effects, we apply them to the whole text, and then we make connections, maybe to the theme, the world, other literature, or the author. And finally, we say a lot about a little. In the end, it's not the author's words that are being graded in our papers, it's ours.